Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellbite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to go on a bit of a PBE checkup here and talk about a couple of the changes that are going on the PBE. They may or may not go live, but tends to be that when something's on the PBE, it does end up making it to live, so I think there's some merit in talking about it in advance and kind of giving at least some of my feedback on where I think these changes are going in the future. Now, first I do want to talk about the Akali changes on PBE that just went up tonight, because these are some really big changes, and I did want to delve into them a little bit because Riot have said they are attempting to buff up Akali, as she has been underwhelming over the last couple of patches, and I know people are going to look at these changes and say, oh, this is just a big fat nerf to my favorite champion, and I want to kind of go through it sort of piecemeal by piece, and kind of see, why this is actually going to end up being an overall buff for Akali. In the same vein that the Xin Zhao changes, there were some nerfs in there, or at least some numbers reduction, which people always see and are like, oh, my champion's getting nerfed, but you want to look at it as a whole, and you kind of want to be evaluating what these changes actually mean for the champion. So let's go ahead and dive into it. I will have these Surrender at 20 posts linked down in the description below if you want to follow along with me as I go through these changes, but either way, I'm going to go ahead and start off with the base stats here. First off, Akali's base HP is being lowered from 575 to 500. Now, this is a huge deal. I know I said Akali is overall getting buffed on this patch, which I do think is fair. But this is still a big change, but I think it's a good change because it is reducing Akali's ability to take poke, especially in the early phases of the game. It does mean that especially if she's in a melee champion matchup, there's a lot less damage she can take from these champions, because even a 75 health drop, it doesn't sound like a ton. But remember, in the early stages of the game, when champions only have one ability and can do so much damage with auto attacks, like every champion is doing 50 to 60 to 70 even damage with auto attacks based on things like runes, masteries, that sort of thing. So that much damage in a single auto attack is actually a fairly good chunk of a champion's health bar, especially when you then factor in whatever ability they have in their keystone, if they're able to proc it, that sort of a thing. So that 75 HP being dropped down is actually a big deal, and that can make the difference between surviving an auto attack with 1 HP left or dying to it. So that is a big nerf there. And on top of that, Riot are going to follow that up by nerfing down Akali's passive so that it no longer restores energy. That's right. If Akali is proccing Assassin's Mark, backing away and then coming back in for the boosted auto attack, she's getting no energy back from that. Now, this is not as big of a deal as you might initially think once we actually take a look at the biggest energy sucker of her kit, which is 5-point strike. The energy cost on this ability has been changed to, it is greater at level 1, so it's 130 energy at level 1, or at rank 1, but it decays all the way down to 70 at rank 5, as opposed to the old cost, which is 120 to 100. Now, this is a fairly important breakpoint here, because it means that Akali at level 9, where she's maxed 5-point strike, she is now getting 2 full casts of 5-point strike at level 9 without needing that energy refund, whereas before she would absolutely have to have that refund in order to get the 2 5-point strikes and then her shuriken flip at the same time. This new change means that she gets the 2 5-point strikes as well as the shuriken flip pretty comfortably and saves on energy. Now again, this doesn't sound like a too big of a buff until you also consider the change to Twilight Shroud, which is that Akali increases her energy by 80 while the Shroud is active. What this means is that Akali has 280 full energy to use when she pops Twilight Shroud, and also keep in mind that this increases her energy. So this isn't a refund. You don't have to have spent some energy and then press W to get that energy back. This effectively increases Akali's maximum energy while the Twilight Shroud is active. So you can lead off with this. And now that puts us at the sweet spot of 280 total energy at level 9, which actually means that Akali now is able to get 4 full Q casts off while she's got her Shroud active and 5-point strike is at max rank. This naturally is a huge deal because in the previous system, when she had 5-point strike maxed, she was only going to get 2 casts of her Q off and refund with her passive just barely enough energy to also have the energy for the shuriken flip. So if she is using the shuriken flip to go in, uses 1 5-point strike, procs her passive a couple of times in there, then she'd have enough energy for the remaining 5-point strike. This new system means that essentially Akali can choose between either having 3 full Q casts and her shuriken flip, or can just go for the constant Q spam into the passive reset on top of that. So that's a really big deal, and it actually means that Akali is really strong in these sort of extended assassination attempts or extended trades, because she has the option of just constantly casting these 5-point strikes off cooldown, which again is a huge deal, and it really does increase her DPS, especially in situations where she's trying to go for an assassination attempt. As per usual, the energy champion's ultimates never cost them any energy, so you don't have to worry about that factoring into things. She can certainly go for the perfect execution into something like the Shroud, get a couple of Qs going, and then look for the final execution on the perfect execution. So this all sounds pretty good for Akali, right? Now, there are a couple of smaller changes here that will also make her feel a little bit worse. The Q no longer deals extra damage to minions and monsters at maximum rank. I do think this is a relevant thing because it means that her wave clear is actually significantly worse in the later stages of the game. Ordinarily, she would kind of have mage tier wave clear, and even though she would have to get in close, the biggest problem is that she has to get in close, right? And so, but that's not that big of a deal because she is able to still get that wave clear going. Now with that no longer dealing extra damage, it means that Akali is fundamentally more vulnerable to mages that can shove her in, especially when they're hitting level 9. They've got their first mana item completed. And I think that's a fair thing for assassins to have a trade-off in, is that, yeah, they have some kill threat. They're really able to aggress on you. But also, if you're just playing the wave management game, assassins can and should be significantly weaker than their mage counterparts in that regard. Now, to be fair as well, she will have more casts of Q in order to help wave clear, so that's not that big of a deal, but it does mean that it will take her a lot longer to clear the waves. She has to stick around a lot longer for more casts of Q, again, leaving her in sort of a vulnerable state. The other thing that changed here is the shuriken flip, which means that this is a really weirdly worded tooltip. So essentially, let me break it down for you. This ability now deals 30% of its damage on the first cast of E and 70% of its damage on the second cast of E. So if you hit both casts of her E, you will get the exact same amount of damage that you're used to on Akali currently. What it does mean, though, is that if you hit the first E and then don't take it in, you're doing significantly less damage than you're used to before. And it also means that that second hit is going to do more, but then you may have not gotten them low enough to benefit from things like coup de grace, that sort of a thing. So in general, what this means is that Akali will need to commit a lot harder to the assassination attempts she goes for if she does land the shuriken flip because, well, that's not going to do too much damage on its own. She does want to follow that in order to make sure that that ability is actually going to be dealing damage. There's also a small change here on Perfect Execution to R1 now deals magic damage instead of physical damage, which I think is a fair trade given that Akali's not really a hybrid champion anymore. And the damage has been very slightly buffed up in the later stages of the game in exchange for some nerfs in the early phases of the game, but that's because it now has a 30% AP ratio, so if Akali is building some AP items like Riftmaker, she will get some pretty nice benefit from that. All this taken together means that Akali will be a lot more deadly in extended fights. She's going to be able to really look to make some assassination attempts with absolutely massive Q spam. She doesn't need to worry too much about backing away to get her passive proc. In that regard, I'm a little disappointed because that's not as much of a requirement on new Akali, given that she can just kind of Q spam you to death because she gets 4 casts of that ability is probably first max, but definitely can still be looking for those procs of Assassin's Mark, walking back out, walking back in to get the damage off, that sort of a thing. But now it's all about the damage and you don't have to worry about using it to just kind of refund energy in lane. This does make Akali significantly worse pre-6, and I think all the way up until maybe at levels about 8 or 9, where she is hitting that sort of level 9 mark and maxing out on 5-point strike, because the energy cost is higher earlier on, which means that Akali will be unable to spam it as much as she's used to, especially given that there is no energy refund anywhere in her kit other than pressing W, which maybe she does want to use that, maybe she doesn't. So in general, I do like where these changes are at by making Akali slightly weaker in lane, especially with that base health drop, in exchange for giving her a lot more power in the later stages of the game. I do think that's a really big deal, and I kind of enjoy where these Akali changes are at, so that's really nice. Moving on to my second subject for the video today, I did want to talk a little bit about the healing changes that Riot are making on PBE. I did talk about this a little bit ago, I think a couple of weeks ago, where Riot made their first sort of pass on why they like healing and why they don't like healing, and this is another attempt at Riot to try and tone down healing in a way that ideally is power neutral, that's just shifting the healing from items and things into their stats and their other benefits rather than just being about the healing. So I do like a lot of these changes. You guys can read through the full list if you would like. The biggest thing, though, I wanted to focus on here is Ravenous Hunter. Now, this is a massive, massive nerf, and it already looks so bad on paper, but people will not stop picking this rune, so it now gives 0 benefit at all with no stacks. It literally gives 0% base Omnivamp and only gives you Omnivamp per stack, which has also been nerfed. So you're only getting a maximum of 7.5% Omnivamp on your abilities. Once this ability hasn't been maxed out, you've achieved a takedown on every single member of the enemy team. That's it. There is no base Omnivamp on this item anymore, or on this rune anymore, and at this point, I do kind of wonder if it should just be removed. Now, I do think Ravenous Hunter has a bit of a niche for the sort of champions that are known for their sustain and their ability to hang in fights for a lot longer than they should be able to. Champions like Aatrox, for example, he immediately springs to mind as a champion that really wants to do that sort of big healing thing and stay in a fight for as long as possible. But at this point, with the rune giving you absolutely no value without any stacks, I kind of wonder what the point of it is, what the point in taking it is, because at least something like Relentless Hunter, right, in a similar situation where you have gotten no takedowns, Relentless Hunter, bare minimum, is letting you roam slightly better and letting you get back to lane slightly faster, right? At least there's some degree of value in that rune. Whereas Ravenous Hunter now is literally giving you absolutely no benefit whatsoever until you get a stack of it at all. So in that regard, I do kind of wonder if at this point it does make sense to just remove it. It does kind of feel like the item or the rune is not being used as Riot want it to be used, which is sort of a way for champions who need the sustain to hang in fights. Instead, it's just being used by a lot of mages and a lot of champions in general as just kind of a catch-all, extra healing in lane because I get to benefit from that little tiny itty-bitty bit of Omnivamp. If I get stacks, great, which I probably will because I'll get at least a few assists, maybe a couple kills. And then I'm kind of off to the races, just kind of hanging out in the side lane, getting some free sustain off of Ravenous Hunter, right? That's kind of how it's ended up being used in practice. And so, and especially given that that category of runes already has 3 other options, there are 4 total, you could easily drop out Ravenous Hunter and just leave it at the other 3. Obviously, that may have a bit of a warping presence, especially with things like Ultimate Hunter now being a lot more attractive, but I do wonder if that makes a little bit more sense to do, given that Ravenous Hunter is just not worth taking at all. I might be overreacting a little bit here, but I really do feel like it's not a very useful rune at all after these changes, so we'll see if they stick. This is PBE, of course, but like I said, I can't see much of a reason to choose it in the future. Anyways, that's going to be it for me today, guys. Thank you all so very much for watching. Let me know what you think of the Akali changes down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially if you're an Akali player. I would love to hear what you guys think of everything that is getting changed up, and especially if you guys like these sort of deep dives into bigger changes on PBE, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. You know, if you want to see more of something like this, or, you know, if you would like rather see less of something like this, you know, just let me know what you guys are thinking of all of that. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.